Brian Day, who has been on the board of the South African National Energy Association, with us now to talk about the privatisation of state-owned enterprises, or the idea of it, and the role, of course, of independent power producers, which follows on the discussion we've been having about Eskom this morning. Morning to you, Brian. Now, since we arranged for you to come on the show, we heard over the weekend that the board of Eskom has lost confidence in its chairman, who previously had suspended these executives. It just gets worse and worse.
Yes, indeed. I think, though, that the big question is to differentiate between privatisation of Eskom and the role that the private sector can play. I think people jump too quickly to a radical, immediate privatisation of Eskom, which I don't think anyone understands as the real answer. But what is true is that the private sector has played a bigger role once there's enough certainty to create opportunity for the sorts of investment that business can respond to. And we've seen that in the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program.
Well, let me pause you there and talk about IPSA, which is a listed power producer, which 10 years ago looked like a great prospect with Eskom opening up and power demands. Nothing much has happened because of the obstacles.
Yes, indeed. I think IPSA was ahead of its time. Many people were really hoping that there would be an opening up of the regulatory environment, which essentially involves two things. One, the granting of generation licenses to people who want to generate power without an overly constrained environment related to the integrated resource plan, and commercially viable wheeling tariffs, which essentially is a little bit like a toll to use the wires of the grid, a little bit like we use the long-distance freeways in the transport sector. If those two things were resolved, I believe we would have a lot more power generated by private companies in multiple technologies, not only the renewables, which has actually been procured by government with Eskom as the buyer. The opportunity is, though, to have private PPAs, where a private entity on their balance sheet secures a power purchase agreement with an IPP, and so doing broadening the sector. Now, it's well within government's policy. Government policy around 2001, a cabinet decision, was that 30% of power would be produced by the private sector. They've started to take decisive steps in that direction, but I believe we can do more to do it outside of the procurement programs rather than only in a procurement program which is centrally controlled.
Ron, you talking about some of the private sector being independent power producers. So Transnet, for example, has spoken about how they are able to generate energy due to their locomotives as they stop, they generate energy. That process, though, how far are we, and is it, are we making progress with that when we are seeing these individual companies now becoming IPPs?
I think NERSA is doing a lot of great work. They're doing two things at the moment, which are, I think, profound and could really advance the sector. The one is looking at a wheeling advisory forum to look at what those tariffs should be. We can't just leave it up to Eskom to determine those tariffs on their own. That's the whole role of a regulator in the industry. And if NERSA then advances that, and in fact later this week there's a two-day workshop where NERSA is calling Eskom and the AMEU, representing the municipalities, and some of the private sector people involved in power, to come and have a workshop type of discussion to actually work through that. The other thing is that right at the moment there's a consultation paper out of small-scale embedded generation, which is really looking at you and me, private homes, commercial businesses, shopping centres, sports stadiums, looking at installing the sorts of power generation, not only photovoltaic, but a lot of it will be solar photovoltaic, but also the opportunity, for example, if you've got a 1 megawatt or a 5 megawatt backup generator in a big shopping centre, why can we not let that run rather than have load shedding?
Well, you can't speak for Eskom, but you mentioned 2001, cabinet decision, 30%. It's 14 years later. So what's the problem? And if all these obstacles were removed, would our power crisis be solved? And if so, in what stretch of time?
I think it could be solved in a relatively short space of time, although it is complex. I mean, obviously Eskom's got their own challenges, and if they had enough alternative power on the grid that they could take enough of their plant off to do the sort of maintenance that they haven't been able to do for a long time, there would be a recovery of that. The availability there. We then would get Medupi, Kusile, and importantly Ngula coming on stream, and Ngula is also important because it buffers the availability issues around the renewables that are coming on stream. You would then have opportunity to really broaden it, and you could get to a situation where you've got the right sort of power. I think the big issue is government needs to bring all role players together to look at what do we want the design of the electricity supply industry to be in the country. Eskom have got a key role and will for in perpetuity in the different roles that they play. Importantly, the grid is a natural monopoly. Who exactly owns the monopoly is not actually the issue. The regulator regulates tariffs, technical and commercial quality of supply in terms of that. You've then got the availability of alternative power generation from big to medium to lots of very small. And I think if we had the sort of perhaps even an Operation Pakisa in the electricity supply industry, where we can really understand what is available. For example, I was involved in a feedback workshop from BUSA last week, where a technical study has shown that there's up to 5,500 megawatts of cogeneration available if the right things are done. And that's the sort of known technology, and typically as green as the renewables, because it's from waste gases, waste heat, where the CO2 implications have already been born.
Well, from what you say, Brian, there are plenty of solutions, and the issue is why aren't we using them? And of course, the leadership issue at Eskom surely is part of the problem. That was Brian Day. He's an energy consultant, a board member of the South African National Energy Association.